Thank you, Lynette. What I like to do at the very beginning of any presentation that I do is I like to recognize Vietnam vets in the audience. These are vets who received the Vietnam Service Medal or the Vietnam Campaign Ribbon. Would you please stand up, and if it's too hard to stand up, raise your hand, please. Vietnam vets. Let's give them a hand. Thank you for your service. I also want to recognize what we call Vietnam era veterans. These are veterans who served during the conflict in Vietnam, but not in the Vietnam theater itself. But they were also there recognized as support for the Army and the Navy and the Marines and all the military units of Vietnam. Anyone here that's a Vietnam era vet, please? All right, thank you. I want to thank Linnea Anderson for contacting me about your event today, and I feel honored to be here. I want to also thank Joey Weber and all the people that assisted in this event and getting the word out, and also members of the American Legion Color Guard. I bring three messages today: one of remembrance, one of danger, and one of hope. Today's event in Panora, Iowa, on Vietnam Veterans Day, is a way to honor and remember those of us who sacrificed a part of our lives to heed the call to our country. It's also a day of honor and to remember those who gave their lives as well for the same call. There are many ways to prevent the history of our sacrifices from being forgotten. With honoring events such as this, with veterans reunions, with physical memorials in the form of veterans parks and monuments, and with publications of testimonials and memoirs. One such publication released in 2017 after many years in development is a coffee table book entitled Vietnam Vets Still Coming Home. It's a book that captures the stories of 32 Vietnam veterans from the tri-state area of Iowa, South Dakota, and Nebraska. And since completion of this book, 10 of the 32 veterans have passed. That's close to 1/3 of those veterans honored in this book. The veterans are still the largest group, the Vietnam veterans, of war veterans in the country, but we are year by year fading away, as the late General Douglas MacArthur stated some 75 years ago. Bear with me for a very brief commercial message. If any of you are interested in purchasing a copy of the book, I have brought some with me. They are out in the lobby. When most coffee table books cost $100, maybe $200, this one sells for $60, and 100% of the proceeds go to veterans organizations, veterans help organizations distributed by the Disabled American Veterans, the DAV. Remembrance is a powerful tool for keeping the good things of our past alive. Remembering the good times we've all had, remembering the good people that we all knew, remembering those historical moments of the past that have strengthened our unique democracy. You all have your own stories, all you vets. So I'd like to give a little bit of my story. I was born in 1943 in the middle of World War II during the bloodiest year when no one knew how or if democracies of the world would survive. The year before my birth, a young American citizen who would later become my uncle was incarcerated in the concentration camp in Poston, Arizona for being a person of Japanese ancestry. Other incarcerated young Japanese American boys were allowed to join a special unit in our segregated military. That unit was the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, which to this day is the most decorated military unit of its size in U.S. history. They earned 21 Medals of Honor, over 9,400 Purple Hearts, and 8 Presidential Unit citations. These 14,000 men helped defeat the fascists in Sicily and up the peninsula of Italy. With a high casualty rate, this unit was replaced 3.5 times during their 2 years in combat in Europe. That means 3.5 times the 14,000 of that full brigade. Like my departed mother, these were Nisei, American-born sons of Japanese immigrants. Most of the parents and siblings were still incarcerated in concentration camps around the U.S. My uncle Hideo Sasaki was released in 1945 when most of those incarcerated were released, and he went on over the years to become a world-renowned landscape architect. He passed in 2000, but the company he founded, Sasaki Associates, still thrives in Massachusetts with some 300 architects on staff. So as I look back in my life, I realize that I have lived under 15 different presidents from different political parties. And I'm sure some of you in the audience have also. When I was a senior in high school back in New Jersey, I was always interested in world events. Perhaps that was because I was 8 years old when my father was appointed by the U.S. Department of Agriculture to head the agricultural mission to a small Central American country under President Harry Truman's Point Four program. For more than 2 years, my father worked for, and my family lived in a small country ruled by a dictatorship. So I know what dictatorships are. In my high school study hall, I read with keen interest the stories in the New York Times about the small Southeast Asian country that was involved in the Civil War. I read that America was supporting one side of the Civil War with military advisors and billions of dollars following defeat of the French in 1954. Soon after high school, my university studies in Colorado as a political science major sharpened my interest in a country that most Americans had never heard of. Little did I know that in less than 10 years later, I would see that war up close and personal. One of my closest friends from Colorado State University and fellow political science major was Ron McLean. Ron and I would spend hours talking world politics over a steak dinner at the Charcoal Broiler restaurant in Fort Collins back in the early 60s. That steakhouse is still in business, but my friend Ron can no longer enjoy a good meal there. In June of 1967, I enlisted in the U.S. Army knowing full well that I might end up in Vietnam because the U.S. Marines landed there 2 years earlier and the war was really heating up. My friend Ron had joined the Marines about the same time I joined the Army. And as things go, we lost contact with each other. Little did I know that Ron was leading a Marine patrol up in the DMZ, where most Marines were stationed. And one day I was sitting in Area Command Headquarters northwest of Saigon, 500 kilometers to the south. And I read an article in the Stars and Stripes military newspaper of Ron's death during an ambush. It was like a heavy punch in my stomach because I did not know that Ron had been stationed in Vietnam. You may wonder why one U.S. Marine's death out of hundreds of American boys dying weekly was printed in the Stars and Stripes. You see, Ron McLean was the stepson of Jimmy Stewart, a decorated World War II bomber pilot and well-known Hollywood star. My mind flashed back to the time I visited Ron at his home in Beverly Hills and Jimmy Stewart answered the door. My mind flashed back to those carefree days at the Charcoal Broiler Steakhouse and the great conversations Ron and I had. Remembrance is an important aspect of our daily lives. In 2007, during the 25th year dedication of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., I was invited to participate in the reading of the names of the more than 58,000 dead soldiers and nurses who died in what was at the time America's longest war. Each chosen veteran was given 10 names to read slowly during the ceremony in front of the wall, and it took 4 days from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. to read those names. Vietnam veterans will tell you, if they feel up to it, about their experiences. And a lot of veterans still don't feel comfortable talking about it. And that's understandable. It's notable that each veteran has a different story to tell. And that's what's important in the telling. Experiences differ depending on their service branch. Their stories differ depending upon where they served. It differs upon when they served in Vietnam. It differs depending upon what they saw, and it differs upon what they did. The dangers that soldiers face is not just on the battlefield. It lies in the reason soldiers are not told why they are sent to fight and the disinformation that is disseminated to the public. We know now that the Gulf of Tonkin resolution that was passed by Congress, which allowed President Johnson to send ground troops to Vietnam, was based on a fabricated incident. The Vietnam War that was supposed to end by 1968, according to General Westmoreland, intensified to the point that President Johnson refused to seek re-election. First time in history that happened. President Richard Nixon ran on the promises to end the war with his slogan, "Peace with Honor." Roughly 35,000 U.S. soldiers had already died when Nixon took office in 1969, and our country laid their hopes on quickly ending the war and bringing our troops home. But another 21,000 American soldiers died in Vietnam before the end came. When I began service in Vietnam in 1969, when Nixon took office, our troop levels were at their highest, 540,000 troops, over 500,000. But I also witnessed the first troop withdrawal from Vietnam. It was too slow. Over the next 4 years, those 21,000 additional soldiers would not come home. I had the opportunity to return to Vietnam in 2008, 38 years after I served. Before that, some of my Vietnam veteran friends had returned to Vietnam, and they urged me to put Vietnam on my bucket list. I didn't have to put a trip back to Nam on my bucket list, because the year after that I participated in the reading of the names in Washington, D.C., I was invited by the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Foundation to join a small delegation to spend 10 days in Vietnam. I didn't hesitate. That delegation of 20 included Jan C. Scruggs, the founder of the Vietnam Memorial Wall. 7 of us were Vietnam veterans. 2 brought their sons with them, and we were greeted with open arms. It was a healing process to be so warmly welcomed by our former enemy. And the welcome was genuine. They repeatedly said that they saw our government as the enemy, but they understood the duty requirements of the soldier, us. These words were coming from former North Vietnamese and Viet Cong soldiers. Remember, Vietnam has a 2,000-year history of warfare. And during those 10 days, none of us could buy a drink without a Vietnamese veteran picking up the tab. While in Hanoi, we were honored by the country's only Vietnam War Veterans organization, and it had 1 million members. The veterans in our group were given the same commemorative pin that the Vietnamese veterans wear, and I'm wearing that pin today. The healing of our emotional wounds was welcomed, and I'm glad that Vietnam is now a strong trading partner with the U.S. For those of you who have the chance to do some overseas traveling, I would strongly recommend Vietnam. They genuinely like Americans. Shortly after I returned from my trip to Vietnam, I began fundraising for a permanent Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall in South Sioux City, Nebraska. Medal of Honor recipient Colonel Bud Day, dozens of other veterans and I had a dream to build a half-scale replica of the wall in D.C. And that effort has been completed, along with the Korean War Memorial, an interpretive center and a museum, and a dog park dedicated to a soldier and his service dog who sacrificed their lives in Afghanistan. If you make the trip to Sioux City, be sure to cross the Veterans Bridge on Interstate 29 and visit Freedom Park along the banks of the mighty Missouri. I'm also working with the Vietnam Veterans of America Northwest Iowa chapter in bringing the moving wall to Sioux City soon. These memorials, both permanent and traveling, keep alive our remembrance of the sacrifices Americans of all beliefs and all ethnicities gave to preserve our democratic freedoms. And today I see our democratic experiment in more danger than it has been in the past. We have a Congress that is polarized, we have a Justice Department and a Supreme Court that is politicized. We have judicial rulings that are being ignored. We see attempts to take away methods of voting we have always had. And we see free speech and assembly under attack. So I want to say to you, even though a lot of the guardrails are disappearing that normally balance everything in Washington, that the one guardrail that still exists is sitting right here. It's you and your vote. And I hope that everybody of age votes. It doesn't matter. I could care less your political party. I think the important thing is you look at the candidates, select candidates that are honest, sensible, and ethical. That's important. And the midterms are going to be extremely important to all of us in order to ensure our democracy stays solid. Do your research, and that is the hope that I give you today. So be safe and go in peace. Thank you.